All right, now we're good.
So I actually don't know the folks on the Google side. If we can just do some minor introduction.
I'm sorry, Niraj. So this is Niraj Potter. He works for F5 and for Aspen Mesh in Boulder. So why don't you go ahead, Chris?
So yeah, I'm Chris Wilson. So I'm also working on Istio here at Google.
I'm Jason. We met yesterday.
Yep.
Yeah,
I remember.
Is there anyone else in the room who wanted to give themselves an introduction? I see names, but I don't actually know everyone.
Yeah, I can start. So this is Lucas Ponce. I work in Kiali project in Red Hat. So I'm remote in Europe. So happy to join you guys.
Hi, Lucas.
Yeah, I'm Matt. I also work on Kiali.
Okay.
Hey folks, I'm Sundip Parekh. I'm a Googler. I work on Istio from the cloud developer advocacy side.
Cool.
Sweet.
Yeah. I'm Xavier Canal. I'm also in a Kiali team working from Barcelona, software engineer.
Great.
That sounds great. Well, I have a blank document here that I'm going to get a link out to everyone for. Not all of you guys have been involved in all of the conversations, so I'll start with just a few minutes of context. We have found both in the config and the user experience working group that there are a lot of people thinking about validation. It's a huge pain point in Istio today to not know whether your objects are just being swallowed and essentially piped to dev null because they're invalid, or if you've actually got valid configuration and something else may be going wrong, or maybe it's just healthy. So there are a lot of us thinking about it, and there are a lot of us thinking about it in different directions. We've heard from Ed Snibble from IBM, who has put together, was it Analyze or Inspect? He did Inspect. Istio Cuddle Inspect, which does some interesting things, and that's, as I understand it, going out with 1.3. We have Istio Cuddle Analyze is also going out with 1.3, which came from Oz, who couldn't be here today, so we're going to be representing him. Kiali also has some awesome validation features. Niraj, you've worked on the Istio vet command with some great validation rules there. So there's clearly a lot of energy being put towards validation, a lot of thought. It's a very big user pain point. What we'd like to try to achieve is that in the 1.4 timeframe, Istio has a coherent validation story. The bad news behind all of us working on validation, the worst case scenario, is that we each produce our own unique tool with its own unique rules, looking at its own unique objects. And then you can say, well, my cluster is Istio vet valid, but it's not Istio analyze valid. I don't think that's a use case that any of us wants. And so we've talked about this a little in the config and user experience working groups. And is that the doc that
That's
I just?
the doc, yeah.
Thank you. I can't talk and type at the same time. I can't talk and just talk. Anyhow, so the purpose of this meeting is to start getting everyone on the same page. And so to that end, we've heard from a lot from IBM and Ed Snibble, a lot from Google and the work that we've done on multi-object validation here. Are there, and we've put together a document in case any of you guys haven't seen, that sort of walked through the 4 or 5 tools that we're aware of. What I wanted to start with is asking, is there anything we've missed? Are there tools we've missed? Is there a tool that we did not give a fair shake in the document that maybe we misunderstood and could use more context on?
One of the ones I've been looking at recently to do something similar was Gatekeeper and OPA as a way to kind of validate or audit. Well, so two angles. One is reject or warn on admission control, and then validate or audit after the fact.
So Gatekeeper and what?
Gatekeeper and OPA, Open Policy Agent. Gatekeeper is a sub-project out of Open Policy Agent, but it's effectively a controller that sits in the control plane and lets you, kind of create constraints and constraint templates. The constraint template itself actually includes the OPA language, Rego, I don't know what it's called. And there's actually, in the OPA library on GitHub, there's actually a handful of like Istio audit policies you can kind of implement. So they do something, I think some similar overlap. And I have opinions on how that could be better and the challenges there are. But I'm working through it right now to see if I can get that up and running, to at least like do something simple, like reject my service, or at least warn me if I don't have the correct naming structure on the port name.
Yeah, that's definitely not something we looked at yet. So thanks, Sandeep.
And especially for an implementation, once we have an agreement on the broader principles here, using something like an OPA is very interesting to think about.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of why I liked the proposal around multi-object validation from Galley, because in theory, if it's in Galley, it's in the control plane already, which means presumably if Galley exposes some kind of API to do validation, then in theory, Kiali could plug into that at some point, or OPA or Gatekeeper could plug into it too. So it's one place, but it serves many tools. So depending on how enterprises want to consume or want to have validation, it's coming out of a central place, as opposed to like handwriting policies, for common problems.
Yeah, and use cases are definitely something we want to talk about in this meeting in terms of how we want the validation tools to be accessed. Certainly, we have some use cases that are already established, like Kiali, that we would want to continue providing for if they're interested in using what we build. Obviously, separate projects, separate governance. But yeah, once we're done with the tools section, I would like to circle back to that and talk about the different ways this tool could be used. Anybody else have comments on a tool that maybe could use some clarification or that we weren't already aware of? All right, well then I'll take Sandeep's comment as a segue. My next big question for everyone is what our use cases are. And so I'm going to start by throwing out one that Chris Wilson has championed here at Google. And that is, we would like for users to be able to run whatever validator it is, whether it's got to have some kind of a command line interface, I guess, to do this. But we'd like to be able to run it against YAML files, not against a live Kubernetes cluster or a live service mesh, but static configuration files or in YAML or JSON format, so that if you're in like a GitOps model or something like that, you can get validation information before deploying into your production cluster. So that's one use case, but I'd like to hear from you guys about others that you're interested in.
So for us, the way we run Istio Vet is in two modes. One is you can run your CLI Istio Vet or the container inside your cluster, and it will look at all the resources that are currently running and then print out a bunch of stuff. So I would take the other side of this, which is I should be able to inspect a running cluster and I can tell it at any point what are the failures, I guess.
Right, to validate against the running cluster.
Yeah, and from Kiali perspective, if you can play with the validation that we have in place, we try also to combine the static configuration of the Istio resources, for example, a virtual service and destination rules, and to check, for example, if a user is pointing to a service that doesn't exist in the cluster, or things like that. For example, if you are trying to link with a gateway that it's not created, or something that, for example, in Galei we have 3 levels of information, something that we know that is an error, that is going to create a failure that you are going to see in the graph. You are going to start to see a lot of red signals. Another thing that we want to warn is that it's just a warning, something that, hey, we don't know, but probably is just a good point to spot the user, okay, probably check this with another more analyzed situation. Right? Another thing is that we don't know when we don't have information. For example, if the user are referring from one namespace to another namespace that the user has not access, for example, Kiali can detect, hey, I cannot access to that namespace for some reason, and probably is something that you want to inspect. I more or less cover all the use cases that we do. So for that, we need a static configuration, which is what today we are doing, is just reading the resources and also combine that with all the runtime information that we can collect from the Kubernetes API. And this is basically what we would like to not be part of Kiali backend as it is, but something that it can be done, it can be done in like a service that we can consume by Kiali. But that service is something that we think, we started proposing this at the beginning of the project with Galei, but okay, Galei was focused more in scheme validations, you should be very fast, blah, blah, but we think that like something in the Istio pane and the Istio control plane could make more sense for all this tooling.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
So that last point that Lucas made is really important for us also. It should be easy to consume, like an event-based or one place to look at that this is happening. It's little difficult to create like a dashboard or some other reporting tool if you have to go and inspect every other configuration. Right?
Yep.
Right. So are you proposing, Niraj, that we limit the scope of a rule so that we have rules that can be enforced on single objects, or?
No, I'm proposing the opposite. The output. So suppose you figured out when you did multi-resource validation that something is wrong. Mm-hmm. Now I want to be aware of all the things that are wrong. How do I do that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do I go to all the resources in the cluster, which can be all the Kubernetes resources, all the Istio resources, and then look at status fields?
Right. So you want a single view that covers stuff. So I'm the one taking notes. So if I'm writing something that doesn't seem right, please call it out if I'm misinterpreting what you're saying.
Yeah, I think what you have is great. And for me, that is a nice to have and definitely something we shouldn't constrain early on. So this is a reaching out for me a little bit.
Yeah, I wonder if the status field, we need to call it out in the...
That'd be a good idea, yeah. One of the places we'd like to put error information, but not the only place. One place is the status field in Kubernetes.
Yes, we can start from there.
Yeah. I'd also like to call out that whatever we build, this is a little bit moving beyond use case a little, is that we want to think bigger than Kubernetes. One of the things that we're hearing about from the Technical Oversight Committee is that over the next year, we're going to begin supporting other platforms. No word yet on what those platforms are, but we can't tightly couple this to Kubernetes or we will be having this conversation all over again in 6 months.
But it's safe to say we can make some assumptions about component availability, right? Like even if we assume no Kubernetes, Galley is still a component that exists somewhere, and so in theory it's still accessible. Or like Istio CTL still exists. It's just, there might be subcommands or operations that are different.
That's right. Like, so for instance, the status field. We definitely want to put validation information in the Kubernetes status field, but we can't rely on every platform having a YAML-based status field the way that Kubernetes does. So some platforms may look different.
Yep. So one, I just added a line here that I just wanted to call out as something else that to me sounds like a really useful case, and I just wanted to sanity check this, is being able to kind of combine those file-based and live cluster-based cases. So you can essentially simulate the impact of applying a set of files to your currently running cluster.
Oh, that's very interesting. So you want to overlay the two together, as in, is it going to disrupt what I have running?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah,
I like that.
That would be great, because I think if before you push a new destination rule that turns off MTLS, it checks and says, well, that host already has it on, and don't apply it effectively.
Yes.
Sure. Yep.
Yeah, it's like the Openshift can I guess, something like that.
Yeah.
Cool. Just one refinement on this. I think we are all in agreement, but I'm assuming we are not going to constrain ourselves to just do multi-resource validation of Istio resources, but we'll also do how they interact with Kubernetes resources. Is that correct?
That's been my understanding, is the resources that are not strictly Istio resources, but still important to Istio, we still want to, I'll write that down. I think that makes a lot of sense. I think we have some open questions like, can we attach a status field to like a Kubernetes service? I don't know if that's possible or not.
Yes, I mean, there is an ownership problem and namespacing problem. Irrespective of that, like for me, working on supporting customers, biggest problem has been how Istio interacts with Kubernetes resources. So we should definitely tackle that.
So I think the way that would look is something along the lines of, we sort of take the Kubernetes configuration as a given, and then evaluate the Istio config in light of the Kubernetes config. So like this Istio virtual service referenced a label set that is not used anywhere in Kubernetes. So you created a virtual service, there's no endpoints.
The other thing in this gets...
Go ahead, Niraj.
I think that's totally valid, but there are some cases where you have to go beyond that. Take an example for Kubernetes services. And if you don't prefix your names for the protocols correctly, at least in the current version, we are doing some networking automation where we will do protocol detection. You automatically lose like 50% of the benefit of Istio.
Yeah, that's a good point.
And do you think also to have some, I guess that the main agreement is to put the result of the validation into the status of the object, the subject of object that is being validated. But do we evaluate if we can create some kind of events to generate a timeline of, what happens when I delete a resource, or, if I do several changes on the same resource, and I would like to have some, like an eventing timeline that, okay, I did this, I did that. I was wondering if probably in parallel, the result of the validation could be, a new CRD or, some way that we can just store events and just to query the events from an API that we can just consume from Kiali and just to present it in timeline manner, just not only to see what is the status of today, but also the status of the past. For example, if I'm doing modification, virtual services, gateways, and so on.
I see.
But,
Look, I think that was my point around single view of all validation errors. If you do it via eventing, it's perfect. You get both.
Yeah. Yeah, so eventing touches on another interesting point, and that is if you look at Ed Snibel's work on Istio Inspect, what we've talked about so far is all inspecting the config objects, essentially at the Kubernetes or Galley's level of abstraction. What Ed did is he actually goes to each individual Envoy proxy, dumps config, and evaluates it in light of what pilot says the object should have, essentially running a diff. So his covers validation. There are some validation problems that he can pick out, but he can also pick out problems like this particular Envoy proxy hasn't gotten config recently and we don't know why. Config distribution problems. So those are a little bit more event-based. I think those are something that we should be looking at and that I've been digging into for a while, but it'd probably be a good idea because they're so different, because what we're inspecting is so different from config at the control plane config level versus the data plane config level. I feel like maybe we should consider those as two separate types of features. What do you guys think?
Yes, for me they are, because I think when you go to event, just the runtime eventing, you can have runtime eventing from multiple components also. So you can have runtime eventing from pilot saying, I'm having failures distributing configuration. You can also have runtime eventing from a Citadel and even sidecars, which is extreme, but we can. But the Istio-CTL inspect, I think, should restrict to one thing, which is, given a pod, tell me what configuration applies to me. I think that's what Ed was going for.
Okay.
So that is really useful, which none of these things cover, right?
Yeah.
So you're saying like you want to be able to say Istio-CTL inspect pod name, dot namespace, and what you get back is, here are all the rules that in theory should apply to you. To this
exactly.
box.
You're walking back from your single source of truth up to user provided config, the single source of truth being Envoy configuration. So
this brings up an interesting point, because I think this is part of, we didn't totally cover it here so far, but I think you're getting to a point where you're saying like, we need not just an object-centric kind of validation, but we need like a logical validation, which is, so take a collection of rules or objects, virtual services, DRs, whatever, and say, well, for host names, blow it back out the other direction and say, like, for this host name, here are the things that are applying, or substitute host name for pod name or whatever.
I was working towards that. It just became a mess with the changes in pilot.
So I think the operator group, they actually are doing something as part of the install, like check the operator when they install environments. They're checking like the endpoints, if the endpoints are correct among the pilots and then sidecar. So they're doing similar. I don't know what approach they're taking.
Is that Martin is leading that part of it, or is there someone else who's taking that section?
Or Yeah, I guess so. I'm not sure, but I've seen the demo and then.
So we should follow up there to make sure that they're included in, at least have some kind of role in this conversation.
Which group was that, Jason? I missed it.
I think environments, or they're calling it multi-cluster now, or I don't know, like it's, but overall environments.
Thank you. But we should keep them separately from what we are talking about today, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's...
Yeah, I guess it's from the two ends, right? Like I'm seeing this, you're having the runtime and then you're having like the initial validation. And then it's like, we can converge at some point, but I think we're approaching from different.
Well, and if the logic is common, it would be good to actually share code, not just in like a coding efficiency perspective, but particularly for a user experience. If we have two utilities that are going out and inspecting Envoy config and reporting two different sets of problems or two different formats of results, that's not ideal, right?
So that segues a bit. One of the things that I think is probably an important use case here is we try to make it obvious to users what the right tool to use is. Or rather, we don't want to confuse users by having a whole bunch of different tools that do different things, but it's not obvious what they are. We don't, like if we have an Istio Cuddle analyze and an Istio Cuddle inspect and an Istio Cuddle validate, which, by the way, all basically exist in some form at this point, although some of their prototypes, but they all do entirely different things. So avoiding user confusion would be.
It might even be the sort of thing where two of those commands get lumped into one.
Yeah, and that's
just with different results output sections.
Right. That's probably the kind of direction we should try to go, is where possible, we should have a kind of unified I can't talk or type at the same time either.
I would just make it UX. I'm sorry. I've write UIs before in requirements and they come out differently. Thank you. The other thing I was going to say is it feels like there are like 5 or 6 tiers of validation, right? And I think Oz and I talked about it long back. One is purely a single resource validation, which happens as part of admission webhooks.
Yep.
It should continue to happen there, but we also want to do that through a Istio-CTL tool so that people can look at the YAMLs before it gets applied.
So that exists.
That exists.
That's what Istio Cuddle validate does, right?
Exactly.
Now.
So
and that lets you validate files before you apply them.
Yes. So I think we need to come up with the unified naming scheme for what we are going to call this particular thing, which is your single resource is valid, but when you combine it with multiple things, it kind of acts weirdly. So if you add that in validate, it might be confusing, but at the same time, validate feels like the right name. You see my point?
Yeah, it does seem to me, getting a little bit away from our current goal of just trying to find use cases, but it does seem to me like we could probably fold that functionality in and just make it clear that this is kind of a different level of thing. This is something that is technically valid, but hey, here are some problems we think you will have if you try to apply it.
If we think of the kubectl model where they've got kind of verb object or verb class object, get pod foo, we might be able to have like validate virtual service X or validate all. That just goes and gets everything. And then you can provide a -F to a folder for it to read in YAML or JSON files, or it can read your kubectl and connect and get config that direction.
That sounds great.
Istio-CTL has subcommands for a lot of or subcommands, I guess, for a lot of the subcommands. So I think Istio-CTL validate object lets you do the single for API conformance, and then validate, I don't know, something larger, broader, whatever the case may be. But like validate the plan, right? Like validates the entire apply approach of like the impact it's going to have, and gives you those warnings. Again, especially for the purposes of like CD tooling or GitOps tooling, would be nice to have that.
Yeah.
All right.
So let's see, use cases. We've talked about CLI, we've talked about status field, we've talked about the desire to feed it into existing web UIs such as Kiali.
So I have a couple.
Let's hear it.
That we haven't talked about here yet. So one of the things that Oz pointed out that I think is really valuable is the idea that we can have validation errors with searchable error codes. So rather than just relying on a particular string message that describes it, we actually have a concrete code for every kind of validation message that we want to surface. And also making it clear what's, you can give them levels too, right? So you can have errors separate from warnings, separate from whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Structured errors rather than free-form errors. Totally for it.
Right.
Yep.
Let's see, a couple others.
It should include a path as well, to where the actual error happened, or where the actual validation issue is in the actual file.
Yeah, so that's another thing that what I really love about the Kiali implementation in particular is just being able to see, the YAML file in your line highlighted is really helpful. And I think it is really valuable to be able to tie validation error back to the a source where it came from. Again, if we have a structured validation message, we can have a field that provides that information, which is, as far as I can tell, is more or less how Kiali is doing it.
Yeah, our goal would be, from Kiali perspective, to try to consume these rules in some Istio component when, when the rules can be something pluggable and everyone can contribute. And, and Kiali doesn't need to upgrade just to get more rules. It's something that probably in runtime, for example, we can add more rules in, in something fashion that we can add more configuration or something like that. So the idea is to have some kind of metadata of how to describe this rule, how this rule can be consumed by the Istio component, and be ready into the API could be also much helpful.
Out of curiosity, are any of the tools we're discussing today, are any of them not written in Golang?
I think CubeMan, I don't know if there's a representative here, that's not written in Golang.
Yeah, CubeMan is different.
Yeah, and just to add to this final point around tying back and how you want to give the errors, what we did as part of Istio Vet was we had these two things. At the same point, we also said, this is how you fix them. There is actually documentation which tells you how you resolve this error. That was the most useful. Yeah, that was the most useful thing. It incentivizes also developers when they are writing these. They need to create documentation on how to fix them, right?
Yeah, that's really
Look,
cool.
You can't submit an error code without actual docs page that describes.
That's why I like structured errors. Yes, exactly.
Right.
We have bots that can enforce that. I mean, it just enforces that the page exists. What is on the page is a whole different story, but
I'm getting kicked out. I'll try to connect back up. Thanks, folks.
All right, thanks, Sandeep.
All right, thank you. Are we on time? Oh yeah, we were about on time.
Sandeep is in Australia. Nice.
Okay.
This is great for requirements from my side.
Okay, so I think, Chris, did you have any others?
I'm writing it down right now. So I'd love to, whatever we come up with, I want to try to maintain as much as possible the validation logic that's already proven its worth in all these various tools. So to the extent we can reuse, if not the actual code, at least the logic, I think that's super valuable.
Yes.
And we're getting kicked out, yeah.
Did I only reserve a half hour?
I think we had 30 minutes. Yeah.
It was just half hour.
Okay. Guys, sorry, I thought I planned 60 minutes. I planned 30. So I will, is this a good time for like next week? Niraj, I think you're out for a while.
I'm out the whole of next week, yes.
Okay. I'll continue writing in this document some architectural thoughts based on the requirements that we have listed there, and we'll kind of follow up online and plan for another video conference in 2 weeks. Does that sound good to everyone?
Sounds great.
All right. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.